It all began with a phone call late one evening. My uncle, Robert, rang me in a panic, his voice trembling with urgency. He claimed my cousin, his son, had been rushed to the hospital after a serious car accident. According to him, the medical bills were piling up, and their insurance wouldn't cover everything. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death, he pleaded. But I need $10,000 right away to keep the doctors from stopping treatment. I was taken aback. While Robert and I weren't particularly close, he'd always been the fun, larger-than-life figure at family gatherings. I'd never seen him this desperate before. I told him I'd see what I could do, but I needed some time to arrange the money. He kept pushing, though, texting and calling multiple times in the following hours. His panic seemed so genuine that I convinced myself I couldn't ignore his plea. I didn't have $10,000 just lying around, but I'd been saving for a down payment on a house. It wasn't easy to part with that money, but I figured it was the right thing to do. Family comes first, right? I transferred the money the next morning, and Robert thanked me profusely, promising to pay it back as soon as possible. He even went so far as to invite me to dinner once his son was out of the hospital, saying he wanted to express his gratitude in person. For the next couple of weeks, I checked in periodically to ask about my cousin's condition. Robert always gave vague updates, saying his son was stable but needed more treatments. He seemed reluctant to share details, which struck me as odd, but I chalked it up to stress. Things started unraveling about a month later when I bumped into my cousin at a local coffee shop. I froze, unsure how to approach him. Should I ask how he was recovering? Would it be weird to bring up the accident? But then he waved at me, looking completely fine. No casts, no crutches, no visible signs of injury. "Hey," he said cheerfully. "Long time no see." I awkwardly asked how he was doing, trying to fish for some mention of the accident. He seemed confused and asked why I was acting so weird. Finally, I couldn't hold back. "I heard about your accident," I said. "Your dad told me you were in the hospital for weeks." He laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that put me at ease. "What are you talking about? I haven't been in the hospital. I'm fine." I left the coffee shop feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under me. My uncle had lied, there was no car accident, no hospital bills, no life-or-death emergency. The next day, I decided to confront him. I showed up at his house unannounced, and he looked genuinely surprised to see me. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone casual, like nothing was wrong. I didn't beat around the bush. "I ran into your son yesterday. He told me he's never been in the hospital. Care to explain why you needed $10,000 from me?" Robert's face turned red, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he tried to laugh it off. "Oh, that? It was just a misunderstanding. He didn't want anyone to know how bad things really were, so he told you that to keep up appearances?" "Cut the crap, Robert," I snapped. "There was no accident, was there?" His expression hardened. "Okay, fine. There wasn't an accident. But I needed the money. It's not like you're starving, and I plan to pay you back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You lied to me, drained my savings, and you don't even feel bad about it?" He shrugged, as if I were the one overreacting. As I got up to leave, furious and determined to tell the rest of the family what he'd done, Robert suddenly called after me. "You don't want to do that," he said, his voice low and threatening. I turned around, incredulous. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I know things," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. "Things about your dad. You wouldn't want the family to find out, would you?" I froze. My dad passed away 5 years ago, and while we were close, I knew he had secrets. He and Robert had a strained relationship, and I always assumed it was because Robert was irresponsible. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's just say your dad wasn't the saint everyone thinks he was," Robert said. "And I've got proof." I left his house feeling more confused and angry than ever. What could he possibly know about my dad? And was it even true, or just another manipulation tactic? I decided to dig deeper. I started with my mom, cautiously asking if she knew why my dad and Robert didn't get along. She hesitated before admitting there had been some drama over money years ago. Apparently, my dad had co-signed a loan for Robert, who later defaulted, leaving my dad to clean up the mess. He forgave him eventually, my mom said. But he never trusted him again. That was the first piece of the puzzle, but it didn't explain what Robert was holding over my head. I reached out to one of my dad's old friends, hoping he might have more insight. After a few beers, he let slip that my dad had been involved in some shady business dealings in his younger years. "Nothing serious," he said quickly. But Robert always had a way of holding things over his head. Your dad didn't want the family to know he'd made mistakes. It wasn't the smoking gun I was expecting, but it was enough to make me wary. I decided I wasn't going to let Robert manipulate me any longer. I called his bluff, telling him that if he wanted to spread whatever dirt he had on my dad, he could go ahead. I wasn't going to let him control me. His reaction surprised me. He looked genuinely rattled, like he hadn't expected me to stand up to him. "Fine," he muttered. "You win. But don't expect me to pay you back anytime soon." I stared at him, my anger barely contained. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking. "You lied, manipulated me, and now you're acting like I'm the one being unreasonable? You think I'm just going to let this slide?" Robert shrugged, his usual smugness returning. "What are you going to do about it? Drag me through the mud? Go ahead, but remember, I'm not the only one who'll come out looking bad." That was the final straw. I realized that reasoning with him was pointless. Robert wasn't going to apologize, take responsibility, or repay the money. He thrived on manipulation, and as long as he thought he could control me, he'd keep trying to do so. After leaving Robert's house, I felt stuck. I didn't want to drag the family into this mess, but I also couldn't just let him get away with what he'd done. I called my mom to vent, carefully leaving out the blackmail about my dad. She was furious when I told her about the fake emergency. "That's low, even for Robert," she said. "I can't believe he'd take advantage of you like that. Your dad always said he couldn't be trusted." Her reaction gave me a boost of confidence. I told her I was considering exposing Robert to the family, and she encouraged me to do what felt right. "You're not responsible for protecting his reputation," she said. "If anything, people deserve to know what kind of person he really is." A few days later, I decided to rip off the Band-Aid and call a family meeting. I invited my mom, a couple of close cousins, and Robert's estranged brother, Michael, who had his own rocky history with him. We met at my mom's house, and as soon as everyone settled in, I laid everything out: the fake medical emergency, the $10,000, and Robert's refusal to pay it back. My cousins were shocked. Michael wasn't. "Sounds like Robert," he said with a bitter laugh. "He pulled a similar stunt on me years ago, but it was for a business deal that didn't exist. I lost $5,000, and he never paid me back." Hearing this made me even angrier. How many times had Robert pulled this kind of thing and gotten away with it? "What do you want us to do?" one of my cousins asked. "I just want everyone to know the truth," I said. "And if Robert tries this on anyone else, I want them to be prepared." The next step was telling Robert that I'd informed the family. I sent him a text, keeping it short and to the point. "I've told the family about the $10,000 and your fake emergency. Don't bother trying to twist the story, they know everything." His response came almost immediately. "You've made a huge mistake. Don't think I won't fight back." I ignored him, but I could feel my anxiety creeping up. What did fight back mean? Would he really go through with his threats about my dad? A week later, I got a call from Michael. He sounded excited, almost gleeful. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I've been digging into Robert's finances, and it turns out he's in way more trouble than we thought." Michael explained that Robert had been taking loans from multiple people, some outside the family, using the same sob story he'd told me. But instead of using the money for actual emergencies, he'd been gambling it away. Even worse, one of the people he'd borrowed from, a friend of Michael's, had grown suspicious and filed a police report. "If you want your money back, now's your chance," Michael said. "This might be enough to press charges." At first, I hesitated. Taking legal action against my uncle felt extreme, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't have another choice. Robert wasn't going to pay me back out of the goodness of his heart, and I couldn't let him keep exploiting people without consequences. I contacted a lawyer and explained the situation. She assured me that I had a solid case, especially with the evidence I had: the bank transfer, the text messages, and my cousin's testimony that there had been no accident. Filing the complaint felt both terrifying and empowering. For so long, I'd let Robert hold power over me with his lies and threats, but now the tables were turning. When Robert found out I'd filed charges, he went ballistic. He sent me a series of angry, threatening messages, accusing me of betraying the family and saying I'd regret this for the rest of my life. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the messages to my lawyer. It wasn't long before the rest of the family found out about the legal action. Some supported me, saying it was about time Robert faced consequences. Others, including a few of his closer allies, accused me of tearing the family apart. "You could have handled this privately," one cousin said. "I tried," I replied. "Robert left me no choice." The most shocking part came when Robert finally made good on his blackmail threat. He told the family that my dad had been involved in shady business dealings years ago, painting him as some kind of con artist. But what Robert didn't anticipate was how the family would react. Instead of turning against me, they turned against him. "Even if it's true," Michael said during a family call, "it doesn't change the fact that you lied, stole, and manipulated us. Don't try to deflect blame." In the end, Robert's attempt to smear my dad only made him look worse. The legal case against Robert is ongoing, but I feel more at peace than I have in months. The family knows the truth about him, and I've stopped feeling guilty about standing up for myself. Just when I thought things had settled into a manageable rhythm, I got an unexpected call from Robert's estranged ex-wife, Karen. We hadn't spoken in years, but she said she'd heard about the situation through the family grapevine. At first, I assumed she was calling to weigh in or offer condolences, but she quickly revealed she had something bigger to share. "I think you should know," she said, her voice measured. "Robert pulled a similar stunt when we were married. He lied about needing money for a business investment, but I found out later he was using it to cover gambling debts." She went on to explain that Robert had a long history of manipulation and deceit, stretching back decades. "I always suspected he was getting money from other people too, but I never had proof. I'm glad someone's finally holding him accountable." Karen even offered to provide testimony if the case went to trial, saying she'd kept records from their messy divorce that could back up my claims. After my conversation with Karen, I started digging deeper into Robert's past. I reached out to Michael, who had already done some sleuthing, and together we pieced together a more complete picture of Robert's schemes. It turned out he'd been borrowing money not just from family, but from acquaintances, friends of friends, and even coworkers over the years. Each time, he spun a different story: medical emergencies, business opportunities, or sudden financial hardships. What's worse, we discovered he had left a trail of unpaid debts behind him. Several people had tried to pursue legal action, but Robert always managed to slip through the cracks by playing on their sympathy or promising to pay them back eventually. "It's like he's made a career out of conning people," Michael said, disgusted. As the legal case against Robert moved forward, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He sent more threatening messages, claiming I was ruining his life and trying to turn the family against him. But the real breaking point came when he showed up at my workplace unannounced. I was in the middle of a meeting when a coworker interrupted to tell me there was a very angry man at the front desk demanding to see me. My heart sank. I knew immediately it was Robert. I stepped out, and there he was, pacing and visibly furious. As soon as he saw me, he started yelling about how I was destroying his reputation and dragging his name through the mud. "You think you're better than me?" he shouted. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a vindictive little brat." I stayed calm and told him to leave, but he refused. Eventually, security had to escort him out, and I filed a police report for harassment. After the workplace incident, even some of Robert's staunchest defenders in the family started to distance themselves from him. My cousins, who had initially accused me of overreacting, apologized and admitted they hadn't realized how manipulative Robert could be. "I guess we just didn't want to believe it," one of them said. "It's hard to accept that someone in the family could be this toxic." My mom, who had been supportive from the start, doubled down on her efforts to help. She started reaching out to other family members, sharing the truth about what Robert had done and urging them to be cautious around him. A few weeks later, my lawyer called with good news: Robert had agreed to a settlement. He'd realized the evidence against him was too strong, and rather than face a full-blown trial, he was willing to repay the $10,000 in installments over the next few years. It wasn't a perfect solution. Waiting for the money to trickle back wouldn't undo the damage he'd caused, but it was a step in the right direction. More importantly, it felt like a validation of everything I'd been fighting for. With the legal case resolved, I've started focusing on rebuilding my life. The experience with Robert has been a wake-up call, teaching me the importance of setting boundaries and protecting myself, even when it's painful. I've cut all contact with Robert and made it clear to the rest of the family that I won't tolerate any attempts to guilt me into reconciliation. Surprisingly, most of them have respected my decision. As for Karen, we've stayed in touch. She's been a valuable source of support, and her willingness to step forward with her own experiences has been a reminder that I'm not alone in this. This entire ordeal has been exhausting, but it's also been empowering. For the first time, I feel like I've taken control of a situation that could have easily spiraled out of my hands. Robert may never fully take responsibility for the harm he's caused, but I'm done letting his actions dictate my life. I'm focusing on my own future now, and I'm determined to make the most of it, free from his lies and manipulation. TLDR, after months of legal battles and family drama, my Uncle Robert agreed to a settlement to repay the $10,000 he scammed from me. I've cut ties with him, gained unexpected support from his ex-wife, and started rebuilding my life with stronger boundaries and a clearer sense of self-worth. Story 2. Am I the a-holy for refusing to change my will after my brother demanded fairness for his kids? I, 36M, am unmarried and don't have kids of my own, but my niece, 10F, and nephew, 8M, from my younger sister, Emma, 34F, mean the world to me. I've been involved in their lives since the day they were born, and the bond one share with them is something truly special. Over the years, I've spent holidays, birthdays, and countless weekends with them, creating memories and building a close relationship. I see them regularly and am deeply invested in their future. Because of this connection, I've set aside a significant portion of my savings for them in my will. This includes a property I own, which I plan to leave to them, and a substantial financial cushion to ensure they have a good start in life, be it for education, buying a home, or pursuing their dreams. Everything was fine until recently, when my older brother, Dave, 38M, somehow found out about the details of my will. Dave has 3 kids, 12M, 9F, and 7M, but the relationship I have with them is distant, to say the least. Dave moved to another state about 7 years ago for work, and since then, I've only seen his family once or twice a year. While his kids are perfectly nice, there's no deep bond or meaningful relationship between us, which is no fault of theirs, it's just how things are. When Dave learned that most of my estate was earmarked for Emma's kids, he was livid. He called me out, accusing me of being unfair and favoring Emma's children. He argued that because he has 3 kids compared to Emma's 2, they need the inheritance more. He even went as far as saying that splitting my estate equally among all 5 children was the only fair and moral thing to do. I told him no, flat out. I explained that this wasn't about fairness or numbers, it was about the connection I have with Emma's kids. They are a huge part of my life, and it feels right to leave my assets to the people I care about the most. I reminded Dave that my money is mine to allocate, and the way I've chosen to do so reflects the relationships I've nurtured over the years. Dave didn't take my explanation well. He accused me of punishing his kids for circumstances beyond their control, implying that it wasn't their fault we didn't have a closer relationship. While I understand his perspective to some degree, I don't think I should feel obligated to prioritize his children just because they're family by blood. The situation quickly spiraled out of control when Dave involved our parents. They're now pressuring me to keep the peace by changing my will to include something for Dave's kids. My mom even said it was my duty as an uncle to treat all nieces and nephews equally, regardless of the relationship. She argued that family unity is more important than my personal preferences and warned me that excluding Dave's kids could cause a lasting rift. I tried to explain my reasoning to them as calmly as possible, but it felt like talking to a wall. They seemed to think that wealth, or the perception of fairness, should override the actual relationships involved. My dad was less forceful than my mom but still implied I should consider Dave's kids more seriously. Meanwhile, Emma has been nothing but supportive. She told me that it's my money, and I'm under no obligation to include Dave's kids just to make him or our parents happy. She also pointed out that Dave has rarely gone out of his way to maintain strong family ties. If he wanted a better relationship with me, or for his kids to have one, he had plenty of opportunities over the years to make that happen. Dave, however, is relentless. After a particularly heated phone call, he delivered what can only be described as an ultimatum. He said if I didn't revise my will to include his kids, he wouldn't bring his family around anymore, not even for holidays. This was infuriating. First of all, Dave already barely makes an effort to visit. His claim felt more like a threat than an actual consequence. Second, it confirmed what I was starting to suspect: this wasn't about his kids at all. It was about him. He seemed more interested in controlling my choices and dictating the terms of my legacy than genuinely advocating for his children. The entire ordeal has left me feeling conflicted but ultimately resolute. Part of me does feel guilty, these are my nieces and nephews, after all, and I don't want to create animosity within the family. But at the same time, I can't shake the feeling that Dave's demand is rooted in entitlement rather than genuine concern for his kids. My decision to leave most of my estate to Emma's children isn't a slight against his kids. It's a reflection of the love, time, and care I've poured into my relationship with my niece and nephew. I believe inheritance should go to those you care about most, not just those who happen to share your DNA. I've also started to wonder, if I gave in to Dave's demands, where would it end? Would he start dictating how I spend my money while I'm alive? Would he try to influence every decision I make, claiming it's for the sake of family unity? For now, I've decided to stick to my original plan. My will remains unchanged, and I've communicated my decision to both Dave and my parents. Predictably, Dave has continued to push back, and our parents are now walking a fine line between supporting him and trying not to alienate me entirely. I've also had several long conversations with Emma about how this might affect the family dynamic moving forward. She's reassured me that I'm not in the wrong, but we both know this will likely remain a source of tension for years to come. I've chosen to leave the bulk of my estate to my sister Emma's kids, who I'm very close to, rather than splitting it with my brother Dave's children, whom I barely know. Dave and my parents think I'm being unfair, but I believe inheritance should reflect the relationships that matter most. The family drama has escalated, but I'm standing firm in my decision. Am I the asshole?